The strange thing about betrayal is that sometimes it arrives looking polite. Mine came in a thin yellow envelope with no return address, postmarked from Omaha, Nebraska, on a rainy Tuesday morning in Des Moines. Inside was a black 8 GB USB drive and a single handwritten sentence. "Mr. Price, I'm sorry. He said you'd never understand the files." 3 weeks later, my son sat frozen inside a title office on Westtown Parkway while a banker quietly closed his folder and walked away from a $2.4 million deal. And the truth is, I almost threw that envelope into the trash. Before we go any further, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy real, raw family stories like this one, go ahead and subscribe. We've got a lot to talk about tonight. I turned 67 last October, which, according to my son Derek, is apparently the age where people stop understanding technology business and basic reality. That was news to me. I still changed my own oil, still climbed onto my roof every spring to clean the gutters, still drove my 2009 Ford Ranger down East Grand Avenue every Friday morning for breakfast at Vic's Route 6 Grill, where the coffee tasted like burned drywall and somehow kept us alive anyway. You know that kind of diner, right? Sticky ketchup bottles, old country songs playing too softly through ceiling speakers, veterans talking about weather patterns like military strategy, the same waitress calling everybody Han whether she liked them or not. That place kept me sane after Susan died. My wife had been gone 4 years by then. Pancreatic cancer. Fast, cruel, the kind of illness that turns time into something slippery. 1 minute you're arguing over paint colors for the kitchen cabinets, and the next you're sitting alone in a hospital parking garage at 2:14 in the morning, trying to remember what your own breathing sounded like before fear moved in permanently. Sorry, stay with me here. That part matters more than you think. After Susan passed, people treated me differently. Not in a dramatic way. Just small things. Quiet things. The cashier offering help carrying groceries when I only had one bag. Neighbors talking slower. Derek insisting on setting up online autopay so I wouldn't forget things. I noticed all of it. That's the funny thing about getting older. People assume you stop seeing details around the same time your hair turns gray. I spent 31 years as a forensic accountant for the Iowa Department of Revenue. My entire career depended on noticing details other people ignored. Hidden transfers, shell companies, false invoices, signatures that looked right until you realized the pressure points were wrong. I once uncovered a contractor in Cedar Rapids who stole nearly $1.8 million because he accidentally used the same typo in 17 fake invoices. 17. Greedy people don't get caught because they're stupid. They get caught because eventually they start believing they're smarter than consequences. That lesson would come back around later. At the time, though, my life looked pretty ordinary. Small house, quiet street, half-dead tomato plants in the backyard, because Iowa weather likes to punish optimism. I spent my mornings listening to WHO radio while fixing things that didn't really need fixing. Susan used to tease me about that. "You don't repair things because they're broken, Flynn," she'd say. "You repair things because silence makes you nervous." She wasn't wrong. Derek lived 20 minutes away in West Des Moines, inside one of those new gray suburban houses that all look assembled by the same emotionally unavailable architect. Big windows, white stone exterior, Garage larger than my first apartment. His company had done well. Really well. Price custom development. Started small. Kitchen remodels, deck installations, then larger contracts, commercial builds, luxury townhomes near Jordan Creek. By 41, Derek wore tailored jackets and expensive watches and said phrases like market leverage during casual conversations. I was proud of him. That's important for you to understand. People listening to stories like this sometimes assume the parent secretly hated the kid all along. Makes the betrayal easier to digest, I guess. Cleaner, simpler. But I loved my son. Deeply. I still remembered him at 9 years old, sitting cross-legged on the garage floor, helping me sort nails into old coffee cans. I remembered teaching him how to throw a curveball badly. I remembered him crying the day Susan got sick because he thought being scared made him weak. Back then, Derek had a soft heart. Life just convinced him softness was expensive, and maybe part of that was my fault. When he started the company 12 years earlier, banks wouldn't touch him. No collateral. Too risky. Housing market still shaky. Contractors folding left and right. Susan and I loaned him $82,400 from our retirement savings. Exact number. I remember because Susan wrote it on a yellow legal pad while Derek sat at our kitchen table pretending not to cry. "Don't waste this," she told him. He promised he wouldn't. For a while he didn't. Then success happened. Slowly at first. New truck, better clothes, bigger office, then networking events, country club memberships, trips to Scottsdale. Suddenly, Derek started talking about people in terms of value. That word bothered me. People with actual values rarely use the word that much. One afternoon at his office, maybe 8 months before the envelope arrived, I watched him yell at a young assistant because she printed the wrong version of a zoning document. Not scream. Worse than that. That cold, polished voice rich people use when they want cruelty to sound professional. Her name was Claire Donovan. Early 30s, smart eyes, nervous posture. She apologized 3 times while Derek kept typing emails without looking at her. "You need to start thinking ahead, Claire," he said. "Mistakes cost money." She looked embarrassed enough to disappear into the carpet. And I remember thinking something very small, but very specific. A man who humiliates people in front of others eventually humiliates himself in front of witnesses. Again, that lesson comes back later. When Claire left the room, I told Derek he'd been too hard on her. He laughed. Not mean, exactly. Just dismissive. "Dad, this isn't your generation anymore," he said. "You can't run businesses by being nice. Apparently, owning a smartphone now qualifies people to ignore basic human decency." I let it go. That became my first mistake. A few weeks later, Derek started insisting I let him help with my finances after I slipped in my garage during an ice storm. I wasn't even seriously hurt. Bruised hip, sore shoulder, but Derek showed up at my house acting like I'd survived a mining collapse. "You shouldn't be stressing about bills anymore," he told me while organizing mail on my kitchen counter. "Let me handle some things for you." At first it sounded thoughtful, helpful even. And honestly, part of me liked having my son around more often. Grief makes people vulnerable to attention, even suspicious attention. You need to understand something about loneliness. It can make bad instincts sound reasonable. So I gave him limited access to help pay utilities and insurance online. Nothing major, at least that's what I believed. Then, one Friday morning at Vic's diner, everything shifted slightly sideways. Vic Moreno slid my eggs across the counter and squinted at me over his reading glasses. "You got that look?" he said. "What look?" "The one you used to get before audits." I laughed. "You make me sound dangerous." "You were dangerous," Vic said. "IRS guys feared you." "State investigator," I corrected. Same haircut. I smiled into my coffee. Then my phone buzzed. A bank notification. At the time it looked small, ordinary, just another transaction. But I remember the exact amount. $3,750. And something deep in my stomach tightened before my brain understood why. The first time I realized my son was hiding something from me. He smiled too quickly. Now, if you've never worked fraud investigations before, let me explain something. Most theft doesn't begin with huge, dramatic numbers. It begins quietly. A little adjustment here, a small transfer there. Tiny movements designed to blend into ordinary life, the same way a wolf learns to move with sheep long enough to get close. $3,750. That was the first transfer I noticed. The notification came through while I sat at the counter inside Vic's Route 6 grill, halfway through eggs over easy and toast that tasted vaguely like the grill had cleaned itself using bacon grease and regret. The transaction description read, "Consulting Fee DP Holdings." I stared at it longer than necessary. Vic noticed immediately. That man could detect emotional damage faster than a smoke alarm. "What happened?" he asked. "Maybe nothing." "That's not your nothing face." I slipped my phone back into my flannel pocket. "It's probably business related." Vic snorted while refilling coffee. "Business related is what people say right before federal investigators show up." I laughed, but only because I didn't want him hearing the change in my breathing. You know that feeling when your instincts wake up before your emotions do? That's what happened. The old investigator inside me sat upright, not panicked, just alert. Because the number itself wasn't the issue. Derek had handled a few payments for me before. Insurance adjustments, property taxes, contractor deposits for repairs around the house. But descriptions matter. And fraudulent people almost always choose descriptions that sound intentionally boring. Consulting fee. That phrase irritated me immediately. Consulting for what, by whom, and why, from my account. I didn't confront Derek right away. That surprises some people, but experience teaches patience faster than age does. Bad liars destroy themselves if you give them enough silence. So instead, I went home and opened my banking records. My house got very quiet after Susan died. Not peaceful quiet. Empty quiet. Refrigerator humming. Furnace clicking. Floorboards settling at night like old knees. I sat at the kitchen table with reading glasses low on my nose and started tracing transactions. At first glance, everything looked normal. That's what made it interesting. Most people think fraud looks messy. Actually, the dangerous kind looks organized. 3 days earlier, $1,840, vendor processing. 6 days earlier, $920, administrative reconciliation. 2 weeks earlier, $3,750. Consulting fee, small enough to avoid attention, consistent enough to form a pattern, and every transfer connected to business entities I didn't recognize. I printed the records. Yes, printed. Laugh all you want. Paper forces people to slow down. Screens encourage skimming. Fraud survives in skimming. By the time Derek called that evening, I already knew two important things. First, the transfers had originated from an IP authorization connected to Derek's office network. Second, whoever organized them understood enough accounting language to disguise them casually, but not enough to think like an investigator. That combination usually points toward confidence mixed with impatience. Dangerous mixture. "Hey, Dad," Derek said over speakerphone. "You get that insurance thing sorted out?" There it was. Again. Insurance thing. Vague language. People hiding information avoid specifics because specifics create anchors. Anchors can be checked. Mostly I said carefully. "You sound tired. I'm 67. That's kind of the brand now." He laughed automatically, too quickly. Pay attention to that next part. When people lie to strangers, they focus on words. When they lie to family, they focus on rhythm. Derek was answering half a second too fast all evening, like he'd already rehearsed conversations I hadn't started yet. I asked casually about the consulting fee. Tiny pause. Then, "Oh, that? Just temporary processing stuff for the company. Easier to move certain reimbursements through your property account because of tax timing." That sentence sounded professional enough to fool most people. Unfortunately for Derek, I used to interrogate accountants for a living. Tax timing isn't an explanation. It's camouflage. I let him keep talking. The more nervous people become, the more details they add voluntarily. By the end of the call, Derek had used the words temporary harmless and paperwork issue 7 times. 7. That number matters because innocent people rarely repeat reassurance unless they're trying to convince themselves to. After I hung up, I sat there, staring at Susan's old cookie jar on the counter. Blue ceramic, tiny crack near the lid. She used to hide emergency cash inside it. "People trust banks too much," she'd say. Funny woman. Smart woman. She also trusted Derek completely. That part hurt more than the money. The next morning, I drove out to Derek's office in West Des Moines without telling him. The building sat near a newer commercial strip behind Jordan Creek Parkway. Modern glass entrance. Company logo in brushed steel lettering. Expensive landscaping designed to make lenders feel safe. Construction companies love appearances. Inside, the receptionist recognized me immediately. "Mr. Price, Derek's in a meeting." "That's all right," I said. "I'll wait." While sitting there, I noticed something strange. Claire Donovan's desk was gone. Not cleaned, removed. You can tell the difference. A clean desk still carries traces of the person who worked there. Pens, sticky note residue, coffee ring stains, life. This space looked erased. I pointed toward the empty area Claire quit. The receptionist shifted awkwardly. "Oh, yeah, about 2 months ago. How come I'm not really sure?" That meant everybody was sure. People in offices always know why someone leaves suddenly. They just decide whether it's safe to say it out loud. A few minutes later, Derek came out smiling too hard. There it was again. That quick smile, the artificial warmth. He hugged me with one arm while still holding his phone in the other hand. "Dad, you should have called. I was nearby. That usually means You want something, he joked. Interesting response. Not good to see you. Not everything okay? Just immediate suspicion. We walked into his office. Big walnut desk, golf photos, framed awards, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking traffic moving through wet November streets. Derek looked successful. That's important because success creates insulation. People stop questioning individuals who appear prosperous enough. I asked again about the consulting fees. This time he opened spreadsheets quickly. Too quickly. Pre-prepared. You really don't need to stress about this stuff, he said. I'm handling it. He rotated the monitor toward me, showing rows of numbers designed to overwhelm rather than explain. Classic tactic. Flood the conversation with complexity so nobody notices missing logic. I nodded slowly. Played older than I felt. Technology's never been my thing, I muttered. That relaxed him instantly. I watched his shoulders drop. That moment right there, that was the first truly dangerous mistake my son made. Because Derek forgot something crucial. I spent 3 decades pretending not to understand things, while people accidentally confessed around me. On the drive home, freezing rain started tapping against my windshield. I remember stopping at a red light near Hubble Avenue and suddenly realizing I wasn't angry yet. Not fully. Mostly disappointed. Like watching somebody slowly become unrecognizable while still wearing the same face you once loved. That night Vic called. You alive? Depends who's asking. You sound weird. I think Derek's moving money around through my accounts. Long silence. Then, how bad I don't know yet. Vic sighed heavily. Flynn, greedy people always rush eventually, maybe. No, he said. Always. That's how they trip. I leaned back in my recliner, staring at the dark television screen. And somewhere deep inside me, old instincts kept whispering the same thing. This wasn't random. This was building towards something larger. Then Tuesday morning came, and so did the envelope. The envelope arrived at exactly 10:17 in the morning. I remember because I just finished tightening the loose hinge on my backyard gate when I heard the mailbox lid slam shut against metal. Small sound. Sharp sound. The kind you stop noticing until you live alone long enough. Rain hung low over Des Moines that day. Gray sky. Wet sidewalks. November cold, crawling through the neighborhood like it had nowhere better to be. I wiped my hands on an old shop towel and walked down the driveway expecting junk mail or another flyer from a roofing company pretending hail damage was a personality trait. Instead, I found a thin yellow envelope. No return address, no company logo, no certified mail sticker, just my name written carefully in blue ink, Flynn Price. The handwriting bothered me immediately. Not because I recognized it, because whoever wrote it had tried very hard to stay neat while nervous. Letters don't lie. People do. I stood there another few seconds, listening to distant traffic from East Grand Avenue while cold rain tapped softly against the mailbox. You ever get that feeling where your instincts move before your thoughts catch up? That happened again. I carried the envelope inside without opening it. Now, most people would probably tear something like that open at the kitchen counter. Not me. 31 years investigating financial fraud teaches you caution, the same way military service teaches some men to scan rooftops automatically. You stop believing surprises are harmless. I set the envelope on the kitchen table beside Susan's old ceramic cookie jar and just looked at it for a while. The postage stamp came from Omaha, Nebraska. Interesting. Derek traveled there twice a year for development conferences. That didn't mean anything by itself, but details matter because details form patterns, and patterns eventually become truth. I finally opened the envelope using a butter knife. Inside was a black 8 GB SanDisk USB drive and a folded sheet of white printer paper. One sentence, that was all. Mr. Price, I'm sorry. He said you'd never understand the files. No signature. But honestly, I already knew. Claire Donovan. Had to be. The wording gave her away. Polite even while terrified. Claire always sounded like somebody apologizing for entering her own life too loudly. I sat down slowly. And for the first time since those strange bank transfers started, real fear touched me. Not panic. Fear is quieter than people think. Panic shouts. Fear pays attention. I turned the USB over in my hand. Black plastic. Slight scratch near the corner. Cheap office supply kind. Probably bought in a multi-pack. Ordinary object. Amazing how often lives collapse because of ordinary objects. Now stay with me here because this next part matters. I did not plug that USB into my regular laptop. That's the kind of mistake television characters make right before dramatic music starts playing. No. I went downstairs into my basement workshop. Susan used to call it Flynn's Museum of Obsolete Technology. Fair criticism. Metal shelves line the walls, old monitors, extension cords, backup drives labeled in masking tape. 3 retired desktops I never threw away because old investigators become digital hoarders eventually. 1 machine sat in the corner, disconnected from internet access entirely. A Dell Optiplex from maybe 2014. Slow as winter molasses, but safe. I powered it on. The fan rattled like an exhausted lawnmower. While the computer booted, I made coffee upstairs. Strong enough to restart a dead marriage. Vic always claimed my coffee tasted like economic depression in liquid form. That man had no appreciation for survival beverages. When I came back downstairs, the Dell had finally reached the login screen. I inserted the USB carefully. Nothing happened at first. Then folders appeared. 7 of them. One immediately stood out. B_McKinley_backup. My stomach tightened. Not dramatically. More like a knot slowly pulled tighter by invisible hands. I copied the entire drive contents first before opening anything. Again, habit. Never trust original evidence. Then I checked the file structure. Spreadsheets, PDF invoices, scanned signatures, audio files, email archives, and suddenly the room felt colder. I opened one spreadsheet. Rows and rows of payments connected to shell companies I'd never heard of. DP Holdings, Midwest Commercial Solutions, Riverside Vendor Group. Amounts transferred in carefully structured intervals designed to avoid automatic bank review thresholds. Smart, but not smart enough. Because whoever organized the system reused formatting styles across separate entities. Same decimal spacing, same invoice numbering rhythm, same lazy consistency. Fraud always carries fingerprints eventually. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Then I saw Susan's name, not typed casually, signed. My late wife's signature scanned onto authorization forms. The air left my lungs. I clicked another file. Property authorization paperwork, loan collateral agreements, trust-related financial releases. Susan Price, Susan Price, Susan Price, over and over again, except Susan had been dead 4 years, and the signatures weren't real. Close, very close, enough to fool banks moving too quickly, but not me. Pressure patterns wrong, pen angle inconsistent, tiny hesitation marks near the capital S. I stared at the screen for a long time without blinking. Not because I couldn't process it, because I could. That's the ugly part about experience. Sometimes your brain recognizes betrayal before your heart agrees to believe it. Upstairs, the refrigerator hummed quietly through the floorboards. Rain ticked against basement windows. And somewhere in the middle of all that ordinary sound, my son became someone I no longer fully recognized. I opened another file. This one contained internal emails. Most were mundane: scheduling, vendor disputes, construction timelines. Then I found a thread involving Claire. Subject line, revised authorization docs. I clicked. Claire had written, "These signatures don't match the originals from Mrs. Price's trust records." My heartbeat slowed. That happens sometimes under stress. Body gets strangely calm once the worst possibility becomes reality. Derek responded 3 minutes later. Just process the revisions. Dad doesn't understand any of this anyway. I actually laughed. Short laugh, ugly laugh, because there it was. Arrogance, not greed, not desperation. Arrogance is what ruins careful criminals. The belief that intelligence belongs only to them. I kept reading. Claire pushed back again. Derek became colder with every reply. Finally, if you can't handle confidential restructuring work, maybe this position isn't right for you. 3 weeks later, according to timestamps, Claire disappeared from company records completely. No farewell emails, no transition notes. Erased. That explained the empty desk. I rubbed both hands across my face and stood up from the computer. My knees hurt climbing basement stairs now. Hate admitting that. Aging sneaks up like bad weather. Slowly enough, you pretend not to notice, until one day you make sound effects standing up. At the top of the stairs, I stopped near the kitchen sink. Susan's favorite coffee mug still sat drying beside mine. Blue ceramic, tiny chip on the rim. I suddenly remembered her sitting at this exact counter years earlier, balancing checkbooks, while Derek talked excitedly about starting his company. "You believe in him too easily," I teased her. She smiled without looking up. "He's your son." "So do you." Yeah, I did. That's what made betrayal different from ordinary crime. Ordinary criminals steal money. Family steals history too. I went back downstairs and opened another folder. This one was labeled property, and that was the moment my hands finally stopped moving, because staring back at me on the screen was a scanned authorization involving the Ankeny property Susan left behind. And underneath it sat a forged version of her signature. The Ankeny property wasn't just land. That's the first thing you need to understand. To most people, it was 11 acres of partially developed ground sitting north of Interstate 35 near a growing retail corridor. Real estate people described it using phrases like future upside potential and expansion-ready positioning. Susan called it the retirement maybe. Back in 2003, before cancer and funerals and all the other terrible little appointments, life eventually schedules for you. We bought that land because Susan dreamed about building small rental cottages there someday. Nothing fancy, just quiet homes for older people who couldn't afford those polished retirement communities where every hallway smells like lemon, disinfectant, and loneliness. We never got the chance. Then she got sick. And after she died, I couldn't bring myself to sell the property. Not because I thought it would make me rich, because it still contained plans. Grief turns unfinished dreams into sacred objects. So when I saw Susan's forged signature attached to transfer authorization documents involving that land, something inside me changed permanently. Not loudly. That's the strange thing about real anger. Television teaches people anger is explosive. Most dangerous anger is actually quiet, controlled, focused. I sat back down at the basement desk and forced myself to breathe slowly before opening the rest of the files. Experience matters during moments like that. Younger investigators often rush emotionally once they uncover something personal. That's how evidence gets missed. I opened a spreadsheet labeled Project Riverline. The numbers immediately told a story. Large incoming loans, aggressive outgoing payments, short-term liquidity problems hidden beneath inflated projected revenue. Derek's company wasn't thriving anymore. It was bleeding cash while pretending to sprint. That explained everything. The transfers, the shell companies, the pressure, the fake authorizations. I followed transaction chains line by line while rain continued rattling softly against basement windows. 220,000 transferred through vendor accounts. 94,000 hidden inside subcontractor reimbursements. 3 separate business entities registered within 14 months. And every path eventually circled back toward one objective, using the Ankeny property as collateral leverage. I leaned closer to the monitor. There it was, a projected land sale estimate, $318,000. Underneath it sat internal notes mentioning an upcoming investor presentation tied to a luxury townhome project near Jordan Creek Parkway. Derek wasn't stealing randomly. He was trying to save his company. Now listen carefully, because this matters. That realization did not make me excuse him, but it did make me understand him. There's a difference. People become dangerous when desperation collides with pride, especially men raised believing failure is humiliation instead of experience. Derek had built his entire identity around success. Expensive watch, luxury office, networking dinners, magazine features in local business journals. Nobody actually reads voluntarily. If the company collapsed, he wouldn't just lose money. He'd lose the version of himself he'd been selling to the world. Still didn't justify forging his dead mother's signature. Not even close. But human beings rarely become monsters overnight. Usually they become frightened people who keep choosing easier sins 1 inch at a time. I printed everything. Every spreadsheet, every email chain, every transfer log. By midnight, my basement looked like a low-budget FBI field office. Paper everywhere, sticky notes, highlighted timelines, coffee cups multiplying like bacteria. At around 12:40 a.m., I found something especially stupid. And when I say stupid, I mean professionally insulting. Derek had reused the same document template metadata across multiple shell company invoices. Same author ID, same revision history, same embedded office username. DPRICE_DEVAD. I actually closed my eyes and laughed. Jesus Christ, Derek. You know that moment when someone disappoints you so thoroughly it almost becomes embarrassing for everybody involved? He'd spent years treating me like an outdated old man while leaving digital fingerprints all over fraudulent records like a teenager stealing beer. Greed makes people careless, but arrogance makes them lazy. Big difference. Around 1 a.m, my phone buzzed. Vic. I considered ignoring it, then answered. You dead? He asked immediately. Not yet. You sound awful. I've had better Tuesdays. Long pause. Then, how bad is it? I looked around the basement, bad enough that I'm drinking instant coffee voluntarily. That bad, huh? The really cheap, instant kind. Sweet Lord. That finally got a laugh out of me. Small one, but real. Vic had this gift for knowing exactly how much humor a person could survive emotionally. Never too much. Never performative. Just enough pressure released from the valve to stop grief from exploding. You want company? He asked quietly. No. You sure? No, I admitted. But not tonight. Another silence. Then Vic said something I still remember perfectly. Flynn, whatever your boy did, don't let it convince you you failed as a father. That one landed hard. Because parents carry private guilt nobody else sees. Every terrible choice your child makes eventually walks back through your own memory, asking where you were when the foundation cracked. After we hung up, I kept working. Not because I couldn't sleep, because focus felt safer than emotion. At 2:13 a.m., I discovered the file that truly changed everything, an internal project memo, short, casual, written by Derek himself. It read, if Dad pushes back, we'll move forward using revised authorization docs. He won't understand the back-end structure anyway. Back-end structure. That phrase sat in my chest like a stone, not because it was cruel, because it was dismissive. My son genuinely believed I no longer understood the world. That's what hurt most. Not the money, not the fraud, the contempt. See, betrayal from strangers feels dangerous. Betrayal from family feels humiliating, like somebody studied your heart long enough to weaponize familiarity. I finally shut the computer down around 3:30 in the morning. Upstairs, the house smelled faintly like rain and old coffee. I stood in the kitchen, staring through dark windows over the backyard. Susan used to leave the porch light on for Derek when he came home late as a teenager. Kids should always see one light waiting for them, she'd say. God, she loved that boy. I wondered what she would have said if she'd seen those forged signatures. Probably nothing dramatic. Susan believed disappointment should arrive quietly. She once told me, yelling only makes guilty people defensive. Smart woman. I poured another cup of coffee and noticed my hands had stopped shaking completely. That surprised me. Then I realized something important. I wasn't confused anymore. Confusion hurts worse than truth sometimes. Truth at least gives you direction. By sunrise, I had organized the entire fraud timeline chronologically across my dining room table. Transactions, shell companies, authorization forms, internal emails, metadata reports, and hidden inside all of it was one obvious conclusion. Derek was preparing to move quickly, very quickly, because financially desperate people accelerate near collapse, which meant one thing. Whatever he planned involving the Ankeny property hadn't happened yet, but it was about to. And suddenly, for the first time since opening that envelope, I understood something clearly enough to scare me. The USB didn't just show me what my son had already done. It showed me what he was planning to do next. I didn't sleep that morning. Not even a little. By 6:30, weak gray sunlight had started leaking through the kitchen blinds while I sat surrounded by paperwork like some exhausted accountant preparing taxes for the apocalypse. My lower back hurt. My eyes burned. And emotionally, I felt strangely calm. That part surprised me most. See, when people imagine discovering betrayal, they picture screaming or crying or dramatic confrontations in expensive kitchens. Real life usually looks quieter. A widower reheating stale coffee at sunrise while trying to decide whether his own son has committed multiple felonies. That's reality. I stood at the sink watching sleet tap against the backyard deck and started asking myself the only question that mattered. What exactly was Derek planning? Not emotionally, logistically. Emotion can wait. Strategy can't. So I went back downstairs and reopened the property files. The Ankeny land appeared repeatedly across financing drafts connected to Derek's Riverline project near Jordan Creek Parkway. Luxury townhomes, mixed retail frontage, aggressive investor language designed to make ordinary debt sound visionary. I knew the type. I spent decades reading documents written by men trying to convince banks they were geniuses instead of over-leveraged gamblers. Buried inside one attachment, I finally found it. A tentative closing schedule, 2 weeks away. Title transfer review pending. Collateral verification pending. Conditional investor approval pending. And sitting right there, beneath everything, sat a scanned power of attorney authorization supposedly signed by me 6 months earlier. Except I never signed it. The signature looked convincing from a distance. That's the dangerous kind of forgery, the kind meant to survive speed, not scrutiny. Derek was betting nobody would look closely enough. Unfortunately for him, scrutiny used to be my profession. I printed the document and laid it beside an actual signature from my property tax records. Took me maybe 4 seconds. Different pen pressure, different slant angle, different pause rhythm near the F in Flynn. You can fake handwriting. Harder to fake movement. I leaned back slowly, then laughed once under my breath. Not because anything was funny, because Derek had made the exact mistake arrogant people always make. He prepared documents for systems, not for humans. Banks verify patterns. Investigators verify behavior. Big difference. At around 8:30, I called Elaine Mercer. Now, Elaine wasn't just any attorney. She'd handled Susan's estate after the funeral. Sharp woman, 61 years old, silver hair cut short enough to intimidate weak men automatically. Elaine had the kind of voice that made nonsense feel embarrassed for existing. She answered on the second ring. Flynn, you busy? With disappointing clients? Constantly. That's comforting. You never call this early unless something's wrong. Straight to it. That's why I trusted her. I hesitated maybe half a second, then said, I think Derek forged property authorization documents involving the uncanny land. Silence. Not shock silence. Professional silence. The kind lawyers use while mentally rearranging their schedules around incoming disaster. Do you have copies? She asked calmly. Yes. Original digital files? Yes. Metadata? Yes. Another pause. Then, don't send anything electronically yet. See, smart woman. Can you come downtown? 1 hour. Bring everything. I showered, shaved, and put on the same dark green flannel Susan used to call my courtroom shirt. Technically, I'd never worn it to a courtroom, but apparently it gave off responsible old man energy. On the drive into downtown Des Moines, the city looked cold and washed out beneath low November clouds. Wet traffic crawled along Grant Avenue, while radio hosts argued about college football like civilization depended on rankings. Normal morning. That's another strange thing about personal catastrophe. The world keeps acting unbelievably ordinary around it. Elaine's office sat inside an older brick building near Locust Street, above a financial advisory firm that smelled permanently like expensive carpet cleaner. When I walked in, carrying 2 banker boxes full of documents, Elaine looked at my face once and stopped making jokes. Immediately. How bad? She asked. Bad enough I brought tabs. That earned the smallest smile. Good sign. For the next 2 hours we reviewed everything. Emails, transfer logs, authorization forms, shell company records, timeline sequencing. Elaine moved quickly, reading with the kind of focused stillness experienced attorneys develop after decades around deception. Finally, she removed her glasses and rubbed one temple. Well, she said quietly, your son is either committing fraud or practicing aggressively for it. I leaned back heavily in the chair. Hearing another professional confirm, it made everything feel more real somehow. I kept thinking, maybe I was overreacting, I admitted. Elaine looked genuinely offended. Flynn, there are 3 forged signatures involving a deceased woman's trust assets. Fair point. She tapped one document carefully. The metadata alone is dangerous for him. Can it prove authorship? Potentially. She paused. Especially if whoever created these files believed nobody technical would review them. I almost laughed again. That assumption kept appearing everywhere. Old equals harmless. Old equals confused. Old equals slow. People really underestimate senior citizens in this country. Probably because we complain about phone apps while quietly remembering how to survive recessions without emotional support podcasts. Elaine organized several documents into separate folders. Has Derek contacted you recently about signing anything? A few times? You signed no. Good. She looked out her office window toward wet downtown traffic. Then she said the sentence that changed the direction of everything. He's moving toward a closing. I nodded slowly. I know. No, Elaine clarified. I mean quickly. Desperately quickly. She turned a financing draft toward me. Look here. Investor conditional language. Bridge loan deadlines. Performance penalties. Derek's company wasn't just struggling. It was cornered, and cornered people rationalize terrible decisions faster than almost anyone. I stared at the paperwork while an old memory surfaced unexpectedly. Derek, at 16 years old, after striking out during a summer baseball game, he'd punched the dugout bench so hard he fractured 2 fingers. "You lose your temper when you feel trapped," Susan told him afterward. He inherited that from me. Unfortunately, he inherited the stubbornness too. Elaine interrupted my thoughts gently. "What do you want to do?" Now that's the real question, isn't it? Not what's legal, not what's possible. What do you actually want? I looked down at Susan's forged signature again. Careful imitation. Dead woman's name. My son's desperation hiding underneath all of it. Then I thought about something else. If I confronted Derek immediately, he'd panic, destroy files, move money, shift blame, maybe even run. But if he believed I remained confused, he'd continue. Greedy people exposed to easy success almost always take one step too far. And suddenly, I understood the trap already sitting in front of me. Not a trap I built, a trap Derek built himself. All I had to do was let him keep walking. I looked back at Elaine. "I don't want him warned yet." She studied me carefully. "You're certain?" "No," I admitted honestly. "But I think he's about to make a bigger mistake." Elaine leaned back slowly. Then, very quietly, "You still sound like an investigator. That's unfortunate for Derek." For the first time all morning, she smiled for real. Before leaving, she handed me copies of several legal advisories and property freeze recommendations in case things escalated quickly. At the office door, she stopped me. "Flynn." "Yeah, this may get uglier before it gets better." I nodded. It already has. Outside, cold wind pushed down Locust Street, while downtown traffic hissed across wet pavement. I stood there for a moment holding those banker boxes against my chest and realized something strange. I wasn't afraid anymore. Heartbroken. Absolutely. But fear had already burned itself out. In its place sat something colder. Patience. So I drove home. And when Derek called that evening, sounding cheerful and relaxed, I smiled into the phone and pretended to know absolutely nothing. Because sometimes the hardest thing a father can do is let his son keep talking. Derek invited me to dinner 3 nights later. That timing alone told me everything. People under pressure suddenly become attentive. Calls more frequent. Voices warmer. Concern arrives wearing expensive cologne. He texted around noon. "Dinner tonight, 801 Chop House, 7 p.m. My treat." Now, if you're not familiar with Des Moines restaurants, 801 Chop House is one of those places businessmen go when they want steak expensive enough to sound like strategy. Dark wood interior, low lighting, wine bottles displayed like museum artifacts. The kind of restaurant where waiters describe potatoes emotionally. Susan used to hate it. Any place charging $18 for asparagus has lost contact with God, she once whispered to me there loud enough for another table to hear. I smiled remembering that, then stared back down at Derek's text. My treat. Interesting phrase. Because technically speaking, most of Derek's money still involved my assets. I texted back, sounds good, short, neutral, old man casual. You'd be amazed how effective harmlessness can be. That afternoon, I drove over to Vic's diner before heading home to change clothes. Vic took one look at me, sitting silently at the counter, and slid coffee over without asking. "That look again," he muttered. "I apparently have several now. You got the dangerous quiet one today." I stared into the mug. "Derek invited me to dinner." Vic stopped wiping the counter. "Oh, yeah. That an apology dinner or a manipulation dinner? Too early to tell." Vic leaned closer. "Flynn, don't let him make you feel guilty for noticing things." "I know." "No," he said. "I mean it. Some parents get so desperate to keep peace, they volunteer themselves for betrayal." That sentence stayed with me, because he was right. Families often protect dysfunction longer than strangers would tolerate it. You normalize small discomforts until one day you realize you're living inside emotional mold. At 6:15, I went home and changed into clean jeans and my brown canvas jacket. Same one I'd worn for years. Frayed cuffs, left pocket zipper, broken since Obama's first term. Meanwhile, Derek probably owns shoes worth more than my truck. Life's funny like that. The drive to downtown Des Moines took about 20 minutes through cold evening traffic. Christmas decorations had already started appearing around storefronts, even though Thanksgiving was still a week away. America loves decorating over unresolved tension. 801 Chop House glowed warm against the wet sidewalks when I arrived. Inside smelled like bourbon grilled meat and financial overconfidence. Derek stood when he saw me. Tailored charcoal jacket, silver watch, perfect haircut. Tired eyes. That part almost softened me. Almost. Daddy said warmly, pulling me into a quick, one-armed hug. "You look good. That's because the lighting in here costs extra." He laughed too hard. Again, there it was. That fast, artificial laugh people use when trying to maintain emotional control. We sat near the back, beside a wall of wine bottles I couldn't afford to mispronounce. A young waiter introduced himself as Tyler and began listing steak specials like he was narrating a historical documentary. Derek ordered immediately. Bone-in ribeye, medium rare. Then looked at me. "What about you?" I glanced at the menu prices. "Do these cows come with college degrees?" Tyler blinked. Derek laughed. "Dad, I'm serious. This potato cost $22. Was it grown on the moon?" Even Tyler cracked a smile. Little moment, small relief valve. Humor matters during tension. Keeps bitterness from becoming the only flavor in the room. After drinks arrived, Derek leaned back comfortably. "So how have you been feeling?" There are questions people ask because they care. Then there are questions people ask to measure stability. This was the second kind. Old I answered, "That doesn't mean anything. My knees sound like microwave popcorn every morning." Derek smiled politely while checking his phone face down beside the plate. Not once. Repeatedly. Tiny glances, fast taps, stress behavior. I pretended not to notice. The waiter brought bread. Derek barely touched it. Another sign. People hiding financial panic often stop eating normally without realizing it. Too much adrenaline. Too much internal noise. Eventually, Derek cleared his throat. "So, there are a few paperwork things we should probably organize before tax season." There it is. Never takes long. I buttered bread slowly. Paperwork. Nothing major. Those are usually famous last words. He smiled again. Slightly tighter this time. "I just want to simplify things for you moving forward." Simplify. Interesting word. People trying to steal from relatives always described control as simplification. He reached into his leather portfolio and removed several stapled documents. I recognized the formatting style immediately. Corporate legal templates, property references, hidden inside administrative language. "You don't have to look at everything tonight," Derek said casually. "Mostly authorization updates, in case anything ever happens medically." I adjusted my reading glasses slowly. Played older, slower. Confused enough to relax him. "Now pay attention here. This next part became important later. I intentionally misread one paragraph aloud. Transfer rights contingent upon— "What the hell does contingent mean again?" Derek answered too quickly. "Basically just procedural backup language." Lie. He didn't even hesitate. That told me he'd rehearsed these explanations already. I nodded absent-mindedly. You know me, and legal stuff. That sentence physically relaxed him. Shoulders lowered, jaw loosened. Right there, my son made another critical mistake. He mistook performance for weakness. Meanwhile, I kept scanning details quietly. Corporate entity names, reference numbers, formatting inconsistencies. Then something caught my eye. A company listed in supporting documentation, Riverside Urban Holdings, LLC. My pulse slowed instantly. Because Riverside Urban Holdings appeared inside the USB records tied to shell company transfers, and Derek didn't realize, I recognized it. I looked up casually. "That's your company." Tiny pause. Too tiny for most people to notice. "Partner group," he said. Another lie. Not technically false, but incomplete enough to matter. I nodded slowly, like a confused retiree trying to understand internet banking. Inside, old investigative instincts sharpened hard. Derek kept talking. Investor delays, temporary restructuring, cash flow flexibility. And then, because greedy people eventually outrun their own caution, he slipped. Once the Jordan Creek acquisition finalizes next month, all this pressure disappears. Acquisition. Interesting choice of word. The land transfer wasn't complete yet, which meant Elaine had been right. He was rushing toward a closing window. I took another bite of steak while Derek kept talking himself deeper into trouble. Honestly, the steak was excellent, which irritated me morally, given the circumstances. "This is annoyingly good," I muttered. "What? The steak." I wanted to resent it on principle. Derek laughed again. Real laugh this time. For one brief second, he looked like my son again, instead of a man drowning inside his own ambition. And that hurt more than the lies. Because underneath all the manipulation and arrogance, pieces of the old Derek still surfaced unexpectedly. That's what makes family betrayal complicated. If terrible people were terrible all the time, leaving them emotionally would be easy. Dinner stretched nearly 2 hours. By the end, Derek seemed relieved, confident again. He genuinely believed I remained confused, that I trusted him completely, that the old man across the table still saw his successful son instead of the increasingly desperate fraud investigator sitting inside expensive clothes. Outside, cold wind pushed rain across the sidewalks, while valet attendants jogged through traffic carrying umbrellas. Derek hugged me goodbye near the curb. "Love you, Dad." I looked at him carefully. And the terrifying part, I think he meant it. That's the thing people rarely admit about betrayal. Sometimes the person hurting you still loves you, just not enough to stop themselves. I drove home through wet streets with low jazz humming softly through the truck speakers. And around 11:40 that night, sitting alone in my basement office beneath dim fluorescent lights, I finally opened the one file on the USB I'd been avoiding since the beginning, the audio recording. I stared at the audio file for almost 10 minutes before clicking it. Not because I was afraid of hearing evidence. I was afraid of hearing my son sound comfortable while lying. There's a difference. The file itself looked ordinary. audio_final2.mp3, 43 minutes long, created 3 months earlier. I sat alone in the basement office with only one lamp on the glow from the monitor, reflecting faintly against stacks of printed bank records spread across the desk. Outside, freezing rain scratched softly against the basement windows. Inside, the house felt too quiet. You know those moments where your instincts already know something painful, but your heart keeps bargaining for a different outcome. Anyway, that was me. Still hoping. Still stupid enough to hope. I finally hit play. At first there was only office noise, shuffling paper, keyboard clicks, a printer running somewhere in the background. Then Derek's voice, sharp, tired, impatient. "Did the revised authorization forms get uploaded yet?" Claire answered quietly. "Not yet." Small pause. Then Derek again. "Why not I check the signatures against the originals from Susan Price's trust file?" Hearing Susan's name out loud hit harder than I expected. Not dramatic, just heavy, like someone quietly placing bricks on your chest. Claire continued carefully. "They don't match." Silence. Then a chair creaked sharply. I knew that sound immediately. Derek, leaning forward when irritated. "They're fine. They don't look fine." Another pause. You could hear tension tightening inside the room. Then Derek sighed. That controlled business sigh people use before becoming cruel. "Claire, Dad won't notice." There it was. Simple sentence, calm sentence, and the kind people say when they've repeated it enough times to believe it. Claire lowered her voice further. "This involves property assets connected to your mother's trust." "I know what it involves. You're asking me to process forged authorization documents." The room went silent for almost 5 full seconds. Then Derek laughed softly. Not happy. Dismissive. "You watch too many crime shows." "I'm serious." "And I'm serious too," Derek snapped suddenly. "Nobody's getting hurt here. Now listen carefully, because this part matters. Fraudulent people almost always describe damage in physical terms. Nobody's getting hurt. Nobody dies. Nobody loses anything, as if emotional betrayal doesn't count because it doesn't leave blood on the floor. Claire tried again. "This could become criminal." "No," Derek said coldly. "It becomes criminal if people start acting dramatic instead of cooperative." There it was again. Language. Always language. Manipulators redefine morality until resistance sounds unreasonable. I leaned back slowly in my chair. My hands weren't shaking anymore. That surprised me. I think part of me had already crossed into acceptance. The recording continued. Papers moved. Keyboard typing. Then Claire asked the question that changed the entire tone of the conversation. "Does your father even know what's happening financially?" Derek answered immediately. "No. Too fast. Too certain. He still writes checks like it's 1998, he added. "He barely understands online banking." That one hurt. Not because it insulted my intelligence, because it erased my life. 31 years tracking financial fraud for the state of Iowa. Thousands of investigations, hundreds of interviews, entire careers built around understanding systems, patterns, and deception. Reduced to old guy confused by computers. You know what the cruelest part of aging is? Sometimes not the body, not the pain. It's realizing younger people occasionally mistake your silence for irrelevance. The audio kept playing. Claire sounded nervous now. You shouldn't be using his accounts like this, temporary transfers, Derek said. Everything gets restored after Riverline closes. And if it doesn't, long silence. Then Derek's voice dropped lower, harder. Claire, do you want this job or not? There it was, the real threat. Not shouting, not rage, economic pressure. People underestimate how often morality gets cornered by rent payments. Claire spoke carefully. I just think this is dangerous. You know what's dangerous, Derek snapped. Losing a $2.4 million development because everybody suddenly grows a conscience at the wrong time. I closed my eyes. There it was. The number, the exact deal, same one that would eventually collapse in front of him. Funny how consequences introduce themselves quietly before arriving publicly. The recording continued another several minutes, mostly logistics, deadlines, transfers, document revisions. Then finally, Claire said softly, "She trusted you." The room went still. I actually stopped breathing for a second because I knew exactly who she meant. Susan, Derek answered after a long pause. This isn't about Mom. Claire's response came immediately. It's exactly about your mother. And for the first time during the entire recording, Derek lost control. You don't know anything about my family, he snapped loudly. Chair movement. Something hitting the desk. Then silence again. When Derek finally spoke, his voice sounded colder than before. If you can't handle confidential restructuring work, maybe you shouldn't be here. Claire didn't answer. The recording ended 12 minutes later. No dramatic confession, no movie-style breakdown, just ordinary office sounds surrounding extraordinary betrayal. I sat there motionless after the audio stopped, monitor humming softly, basement cold around my feet, heart somehow heavier and emptier at the same time. And weirdly enough, I wasn't furious anymore. Not in the explosive sense. The anger had changed shape. At first, I'd felt personally wounded. Now I felt focused. Because the recording confirmed something important. Derek genuinely believed he could control the narrative. If people stayed intimidated long enough, that confidence would destroy him eventually. I checked the time, 12:14 a.m. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Vic after midnight. He answered on the third ring, sounding half asleep. Somebody dead. Not yet. That's not comforting. You awake enough to drive? Long pause. Then, you sound bad. Yeah. Another pause. I'll be there in 20. That's friendship, by the way. Not motivational speeches. Not inspirational quotes online. Just a tired old man putting on boots after midnight because another tired old man shouldn't sit alone with heartbreak. Vic arrived wearing flannel pajama pants underneath his winter coat. Didn't say a word about it either. He carried a grocery bag from Hy-Vee and walked straight into the kitchen, like he owned partial emotional rights to the property. "What's in the bag?" I asked. "Pie." "What kind, Cherry?" "You bought emergency pie?" "I bought practical pie." Fair answer. We sat in the garage because somehow difficult conversations feel easier beside old tools and unfinished projects. Cold air drifted beneath the garage door while we ate pie straight from the container, using plastic forks. Real Midwestern therapy. I told him everything. The forged signatures, the shell companies, the recording. Vic listened quietly the whole time. Didn't interrupt. Didn't offer fake wisdom. Just listened. When I finished, he stared down at the pie container for a while. Then finally said, "You know what the worst part is?" "What?" He probably convinced himself he was helping everybody. That hit hard because it felt true. People drowning in greed rarely call themselves greedy. They call themselves necessary. I leaned back in the folding chair and stared at the old fishing rods hanging along the garage wall. "I keep thinking about Susan," I admitted quietly. Vic nodded once. "Yeah, she believed in him so much." "I know. He used her signature, Vic." That sentence almost broke me more than anything else. Not the fraud, not the money. That. Vic set his plastic fork down slowly. "Flynn," he said carefully, "your son made these choices. Not you, not Susan." Easy sentence to hear. Hard sentence to believe. We sat there a while longer, listening to freezing rain tap softly against the driveway outside. Two old men, cold garage, half-finished pie. Life gets strangely small during heartbreak. Eventually Vic stood up. "You gonna sleep?" "No." "Thought so." At the garage door he stopped and looked back at me. "You still thinking like an investigator?" I considered that honestly. Then nodded once. "Good," he said quietly, "because I think your boy forgot who taught him how to notice things." After he left, I stayed in the garage another hour, watching darkness slowly thin toward morning. And somewhere between midnight and sunrise, something inside me shifted permanently. I wasn't heartbroken anymore. I was preparing. 3 days later, I drove to Council Bluffs to meet Claire Donovan. The meeting happened because of a sentence buried near the bottom of one of the archived emails on the USB drive. If you've never worked investigations before, here's something important. People hiding information rarely erase everything perfectly. They erase emotionally, which means they focus on obvious dangers while overlooking ordinary details. Derek deleted visible conversations. What he forgot was that old email systems preserve fragments automatically. Metadata, reply chains, calendar sync remnants. One archived message contained a forwarding error tied to a public library Wi-Fi login near West Broadway in Council Bluffs. Not enough for certainty, enough for instinct. So Thursday morning around 8, I climbed into my Ford Ranger with a thermos of coffee and 2 aspirin because apparently Betrayal also activates lower back pain after 65s. Cold fog hung low across Interstate 80 while truck traffic rolled west through gray Iowa farmland. Long drive, good thinking weather. The whole way there I kept asking myself the same question: why send the USB at all? Claire could have stayed silent, protected herself, moved on. Most people would have, which meant guilt probably outweighed fear eventually. That told me something about her character before we even met. Around 10:15, I pulled into the parking lot of the Council Bluffs Public Library. Brick building, wet sidewalks, half-dead landscaping bushes, fighting for survival near the entrance. Inside smelled like dust printer ink and winter coats drying slowly. I spotted Claire almost immediately. Corner table near the back windows. Dark blue sweater. Hair pulled up hurriedly. Coffee untouched beside her laptop. She looked exhausted. Not dramatic movie exhausted. Real exhausted. Single parent exhausted. Financial pressure exhausted. Too many nights not sleeping exhausted. When she saw me approaching, she stood too quickly and nearly dropped her phone. "Mr. Price," she said nervously. "Flynn's fine." "Right. Sorry. You apologize a lot." That slipped out accidentally. For the first time, she smiled faintly. "Occupational hazard, I guess." "Fair enough." I sat down across from her. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Rain streaked softly against the library windows, while somebody pushed a squeaky cart of returned books somewhere behind us. Ordinary sounds again. Funny how ordinary environments keep surrounding catastrophic conversations. Finally, Claire reached into her bag and slid a small flash drive across the table. "Read this time." "There's more backup material on this one," she said quietly. "I didn't touch it yet." "What made you send the first drive?" She looked down immediately. Shame posture. People carrying guilt tend to fold inward physically, like they're trying to occupy less space. "I should have said something sooner," she admitted. "That's not what I asked." Her eyes lifted carefully. Then she answered honestly. "Because your son stopped sounding scared." Interesting response. I stayed quiet. Claire continued. "At first, I thought he was just trying to survive financially." She swallowed hard. "Then after a while, it started feeling different. How? He got comfortable." That word landed heavily. Comfortable. Yeah. That matched the recordings. Matched the emails, too. Derek had crossed the invisible line. Desperate people sometimes cross the point where emergency behavior becomes identity. Claire wrapped both hands around her coffee cup, but still didn't drink from it. He kept saying everything would get fixed after the Riverline project closed, she said. But the debt kept growing. "How bad?" She hesitated. "Worse than he probably told investors." Meaning, he borrowed against projected sales that didn't exist yet. I nodded slowly. Aggressive leverage. Classic expansion spiral. "When did you realize he was using my accounts?" "About 4 months ago." That hurt. Not because of the timeline, because she knew before I did. And honestly, that embarrassed me a little. I must have looked bothered because Claire immediately said, "I didn't know how to contact you safely." "You could have walked away. I almost did. But you didn't." She stared out the rainy window a long moment before answering. "Your wife came into the office once." That surprised me. Susan Claire nodded. "Last year before..." She stopped herself awkwardly. "Before she died," I finished gently. Claire looked relieved. "She brought homemade banana bread for the staff because Derek worked through Thanksgiving weekend." That sounded exactly like Susan. Feed people first. Ask questions later. Claire smiled faintly at the memory. She kept talking about how proud she was of him. There it was. That pain again. Quiet, but sharp. Claire continued softly. When I saw those forged signatures later, I couldn't stop thinking about her. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. I watched a little girl near the children's section, walking backward in rain boots, while her mother pretended not to notice. Life continuing normally, around grief again. Always strange. Finally, I asked the practical question. Does Derek know you kept copies? Claire shook her head quickly. No. Are you sure? He thought I deleted everything before leaving. Did you? Most of it. That answer mattered. Not because I doubted her, because partial honesty usually means full fear. I leaned forward slightly. Claire, I need you to understand something. She looked nervous again. I'm not asking you to destroy your life protecting me. I know. No, seriously. If this turns legal, Derek's attorneys could pressure hard. I know. You have a daughter. That surprised her. How did you know pink backpack? I nodded toward the smaller bag near her chair. Elementary school size, unicorn keychain, cracker crumbs in the side pocket. Claire blinked twice, then laughed softly for the first time. You really were an investigator. Still am occasionally. That moment helped. The tension eased a little after that. She finally took a sip of coffee and began talking more openly. About Derek staying later at the office. About hidden loan calls. About investor meetings turning hostile. About him screaming alone inside conference rooms after bankers rejected extension requests. He wasn't evil, she said quietly. That sentence mattered, because she was right. Derek wasn't some movie villain petting a cat in a secret underground bunker. He was a frightened man who kept choosing pride over honesty until the choices became criminal. He used to care about people, Claire added. At least I think he did. Yeah, I said softly. He did. That one hurt too. She handed me printed copies of additional documents, cloud backup timestamps, draft invoice revisions, internal funding memos. Then finally, she slid over the most important piece yet, an email Derek accidentally forwarded to her during a late-night financing panic. Subject line, Final Land, Uth Package. Inside, Derek discussed pushing the Ankeny transfer through before Dad starts asking technical questions. Technical questions. I almost smiled. The irony there could feed a family for months. Claire watched my expression carefully. You already know what you're going to do, don't you? I considered lying. Didn't. I think so. You're going to confront him eventually. When I looked down at the paperwork spread between us, then toward the rainy parking lot outside, and finally back at Claire, when he believes he's already won. That made her visibly nervous. You think he'll keep going? I almost laughed. Claire, greedy people don't stop at safe. She nodded slowly like somebody finally accepting gravity. Before leaving, I asked one final question. Why no return address on the envelope? That embarrassed smile returned briefly. I watched too many crime shows. First genuine laugh I'd had in days. As we stood to leave, Claire hesitated again. Mr. Price. Yeah, I really am sorry. I studied her for a moment. Tired woman, single mother, caught inside someone else's collapse. No, I said quietly. You're the reason I found out before it was too late. Her eyes watered instantly. She looked away fast. We walked out separately into the cold afternoon rain. And as I drove east back toward Des Moines, with fresh evidence sitting beside me on the passenger seat, one thing became painfully clear. Everything was finally in place. All Derek had left to do was walk into the meeting he believed would save his future. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Monday. West Elm Parkway, title and escrow office. 4th floor conference room. Cold morning, clear sky for the first time in nearly a week. Thin sunlight reflecting off wet parking lots and glass office buildings, while people in expensive coats carried overpriced coffee toward careers they secretly hated. I remember every detail of that morning. The exact knot in my stomach, the smell of leather inside Elaine Mercer's car, the way my right knee clicked getting out of the truck. Moments like that burn themselves into memory because part of you already knows life is about to divide into before and after. Elaine met me outside the building around 8:35. Dark gray wool coat, black leather gloves. Expression sharp enough to audit a soul. "You sleep?" she asked, briefly. That bad I reorganized my garage at 2 in the morning. That's either stress or retirement. Can it be both? That earned a faint smile. Vic arrived a few minutes later, carrying gas station coffee and looking deeply suspicious of all corporate architecture. "I hate buildings with this much glass," he muttered, while staring upward. "Makes everybody inside look guilty." Fair point. Now here's the important thing. We weren't walking into that office to destroy Derek. That matters. I know revenge stories usually build toward dramatic punishment fantasies, but real life gets more complicated when the person across the table once fell asleep on your chest during thunderstorms. I wasn't there to humiliate my son. I was there to stop him before the lies consumed whatever remained of him. Unfortunately for Derek, consequences don't care about intentions. The conference room sat at the far end of a polished hallway, smelling faintly like printer toner and expensive carpet cleaner. Inside waited 4 people besides Derek. A banker from First Midwest Commercial Lending, 2 investors from Cedar Rapids, and a title officer named Janet, who looked like she alphabetized canned food recreationally. Derek stood when I entered, and for one brief second, genuine relief crossed his face. That almost broke me, because he still believed I came there to help him. "Dad," he said warmly. "Glad you made it." I nodded calmly. Traffic was bad. Coffee, he offered. "No thanks." Simple conversation. Normal voices. Meanwhile, my entire dining room worth of evidence sat inside 2 banker boxes carried by Elaine. Everybody shook hands. Introductions happened. Business smiles floated around the room. The investors looked exactly how you'd expect wealthy Midwestern developers to look: polished boots, quarter-zip pullovers, the kind of tans you only get from owning recreational property. Derek controlled the room immediately. Confident voice. Fast-pacing, prepared language. I watched him launch into project projections tied to the Riverline development while PowerPoint slides glowed across the conference monitor. Projected returns, growth expansion, commercial synergy. Corporate language always sounds like somebody trying to sell optimism wholesale. The banker asked several questions regarding collateral positioning. Derek answered smoothly. Too smoothly. I noticed sweat near his collar despite the cold room, pressure leaking physically now. Then Janet, from the title office, began reviewing transfer paperwork tied to the Ankeny property. There it was. the moment. You could feel tension shifting invisibly beneath the room, like ice cracking under snow. "Mr. Price," Janet said politely, sliding documents toward me. "We'll need your signatures here, confirming authorization, acknowledgement." Derek glanced toward me casually, relaxed, certain. He thought this was routine. He thought I'd skim paperwork and sign wherever he pointed, like some harmless old man grateful to still be included. Instead, I adjusted my reading glasses slowly. Then I looked directly at Derek and smiled, not angry. That's important. Calm. You know that expression teachers get right before handing back a failed exam? That one. "I have a few questions first," I said quietly. Derek's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Still controlled. "Sure," he said lightly. I opened the first banker box. Silence spread slowly through the room. Elaine began placing organized folders across the conference table with terrifying professionalism. Transfer records, metadata reports, forged authorization comparisons. The banker sat straighter immediately. Investors stopped touching their coffee. And Derek finally looked confused. "Dad, what is this?" I slid one document toward Janet. "Could you compare the signature on page 3 to the county property records from 2019? Janet blinked once, then twice. She looked toward Derek, then back to me. The room got very quiet. Derek forced a laugh. "There's probably some outdated drafts mixed in there." "No," Elaine said calmly. "There are fraudulent authorization forms mixed in there." That landed hard. You could physically feel the atmosphere change. Business meeting disappeared instantly. Legal risk entered the room. The banker opened one folder carefully, started reading, didn't stop. Meanwhile, Derek's face slowly lost color. "Dad?" he said sharply. "What exactly are you doing?" Interesting question, because guilty people often ask about reaction before accusation. I folded my hands calmly. What I used to do for a living. That hit him. I saw it happen. For the first time since all this began, Derek remembered who I actually was. Not just his father, an investigator. Elaine continued laying out evidence methodically. Email archives, transaction timelines, shell company connections, metadata author IDs. Then she placed the audio transcript on the table. That one changed everything. The banker removed his glasses slowly while reading. One investor muttered, "Jesus Christ." Derek stood abruptly. "This is completely out of context." Nobody answered immediately, because context wasn't helping him anymore. That's the problem with evidence. It doesn't care how charismatic you are. Derek turned toward me desperately. "You went through my files." I almost laughed at that. Not, did I forge documents? Not, did I steal? Just immediate outrage at discovery. Classic. "You used your mother's signature," I said quietly. And there it was, the real moment. Not the banker freezing, not the investors panicking. That sentence. Something changed in Derek's face after hearing it spoken aloud publicly. Shame finally entered the room. He looked suddenly smaller somehow. Not physically, emotionally. "You don't understand how bad things got," he said. That part was honest. Finally. The banker closed the folder carefully. "Mr. Price," he said to Derek, voice now completely professional, I think we need to suspend proceedings immediately. The investors exchanged looks. One of them stood first. We're done here. Just like that. $2.4 million deal. Gone. Not with shouting, not with drama, just business people quietly deciding someone became radioactive financially. Honestly, that felt colder than anger. Derek looked panicked now. Real panic. Not controlled executive stress. Actual fear. Wait, he snapped. This can still be fixed. Nobody moved. Janet from the title office already looked ready to call internal legal review. Elaine remained calm beside me. Vic stood near the wall, silently holding gas station coffee, like a witness at the world's saddest intervention. Then Derek looked directly at me. And suddenly, he didn't resemble a businessman anymore. He looked like the 16-year-old boy who once broke his hand punching a dugout bench because losing embarrassed him too much. "Dad," he said quietly. That almost undid me. Almost. But then I remembered Susan's forged signature. I remembered Claire shaking nervously in that library. I remembered every transfer hidden beneath fake vendor names. So I stood slowly. My knee cracked loud enough for everyone to hear. Age insists on participating in dramatic moments, whether invited or not. I looked at my son for a very long time, then said the only thing that mattered. "You should have remembered something, Derek." His eyes stayed locked on mine. I spoke softly. "Greedy people always leave fingerprints." Silence. Heavy silence. Then I picked up the banker box and walked toward the door beside Elaine and Vic, while lawyers, lenders, and investors stayed behind, staring at the wreckage Derek built himself. And just before I stepped into the hallway, I heard my son finally sound afraid of me for the very first time. "Dad, please." But by then, the truth had already entered the room. And truth doesn't leave just because someone suddenly regrets opening the door. The strangest part about winning is how quiet it can feel afterward. No dramatic music, no satisfying movie ending, no moment where the wounded father suddenly feels whole again. Just silence. Cold Iowa silence. 3 days after the meeting at the title office, I stood alone in my kitchen, reheating leftover chili, while snow drifted slowly across my backyard. Like the world had decided, none of this was important enough to interrupt winter. Derek's company accounts had been frozen pending investigation. Not permanently, not yet, but enough to stop the Riverline project completely. Investors pulled out. Lenders backed away. Subcontractors started demanding immediate payment. And just like that, the illusion collapsed. That's the thing about financially leveraged lives. Sometimes they look solid right up until the exact second they aren't. Elaine handled most of the legal communication after the meeting. Smart decision. Emotions make terrible attorneys. The county opened fraud review proceedings involving the forged property authorizations and financial transfers. Derek hired defense counsel almost immediately. Good lawyers, too. Expensive ones. Ironically, paid for by money he no longer fully controlled. Life has a dark sense of humor sometimes. Now, before some of you start imagining prison sentences in courtroom speeches, let me slow this down. Real consequences move differently than television. There wasn't some dramatic SWAT raid, no handcuffs in parking lots, just investigations, interviews, Frozen transactions, professional collapse. Honestly, watching Derek lose his reputation hurt more than I expected. Because no matter what he'd done, I still remembered teaching him how to ride a bicycle in the parking lot behind our old church. That memory didn't disappear just because he betrayed me. That's what people rarely understand about family damage. Love doesn't vanish cleanly. It lingers stubbornly beside anger like two exhausted people forced to share a waiting room. About a week after the title meeting, I stopped by Vic's Route 6 Grill around 7 in the morning. Snow piled dirty along the roadsides. Salt trucks crawled through East Grand Avenue while exhausted commuters stared blankly at traffic lights like modern civilization had personally offended them. Inside the diner, everything smelled like bacon grease and survival. Vic slid coffee toward me before I even sat down. "You look less homicidal," he observed. "High praise. You sleeping? Some. That's improvement." I wrapped both hands around the mug. Warm ceramic, burnt coffee, familiar comfort. Funny how grief makes ordinary things sacred eventually. Vic leaned against the counter. "You hear from him?" I nodded once. "Voicemail mostly. And, he sounds scared." Vic looked down briefly. "Good. That surprised me a little." "You think so?" "Yes," he said immediately. Fear means reality finally arrived. Maybe he was right. Maybe consequences only become real once confidence dies. I didn't return Derek's calls right away. Not because I wanted revenge, because I genuinely didn't know what to say. What exactly does a father say after hearing his son casually dismiss his dead mother's signature as paperwork? There isn't a Hallmark card for that conversation. Meanwhile, Claire Donovan finally found another job. Elaine quietly connected her with a small accounting firm in Omaha needing administrative support. Better environment, better people. Claire sent me a handwritten thank you note 3 weeks later. Real stationery, blue ink. Careful handwriting again. Some people still communicate like human beings instead of software notifications. I appreciate that. Inside, she wrote, "I still feel guilty for not speaking sooner. But I'm grateful you listened when I finally did." I kept that note. Not because it erased anything, because courage deserves witnesses too. Around mid-December, the first heavy snowstorm hit Des Moines. The kind where everything turns white enough to make even ugly parking lots look temporarily forgiven. I spent most of that Saturday in the garage reorganizing tools while old jazz played softly through a dusty radio Susan bought me years ago. At some point, I realized something strange. I wasn't angry anymore. Not constantly. The rage had burned itself down into sadness and exhaustion, and something quieter I still can't fully name. Maybe acceptance. Maybe grief returning in a different jacket. That afternoon, I found one of Susan's old gardening gloves tucked behind paint cans on a shelf. Tiny thing. Blue fabric, dirt still stuck near the fingertips. And suddenly, I had to sit down. Because loss works like that. Not during major moments, during small ones. I sat there alone in the garage holding that glove while snow fell outside and realized how badly Susan would have hated all of this. Not the financial fraud, the emotional waste. She always believed pride ruined more families than poverty ever could. God, she was right. A few days before Christmas, Derek finally stopped calling and mailed a letter instead. Handwritten, 6 pages. I almost didn't open it. Seriously. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter nearly 2 full days while I walked past it, pretending indecision counted as emotional maturity. Eventually, I opened it after midnight with a glass of bourbon beside me. The letter wasn't perfect. That mattered. Perfect apologies usually mean rehearsed ones. Derek's sounded messy, ashamed, human. He admitted more than I expected. The debt, the panic, the investor pressure, the fear of failing publicly after spending years building an image around success. Then near the end, he wrote something that hit harder than anything else. I kept thinking I could fix everything before you noticed. And somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you clearly. I read that line 4 times. Because honestly, that was the real tragedy underneath everything. Derek stopped seeing people accurately once they became obstacles to the life he wanted. Me, Claire, even Susan's memory. That's what greed eventually does. It turns human beings into logistical problems. I didn't answer the letter immediately. Still haven't completely, if I'm being honest. Forgiveness is not a light switch. People online love pretending healing happens through one emotional conversation and soft piano music. Real healing is slower, awkward, incomplete, uneven. Some wounds close, some just stop bleeding eventually. By January, the investigations were still ongoing, though Elaine believed Derek would likely avoid prison if restitution and cooperation continued. Part of me felt relieved. Another part hated feeling relieved. Complicated emotions are exhausting. Every Friday morning, though, life still pulled me back to Vic's diner. Same cracked vinyl stools, same terrible coffee. Same old men arguing about weather forecasts like national security analysts. One morning, Vic looked at me over pancakes and asked, "So what now?" Simple question. Hard answer. I thought about it a while, then shrugged. I keep living, I guess. Vic nodded, like that made perfect sense. And maybe it did, because survival after betrayal isn't dramatic. It's ordinary. You wake up, drink coffee, pay bills, miss people, remember things, keep going anyway. That's the real victory. Not revenge, not humiliation, just refusing to let somebody else's bad choices turn your heart permanently cold. A few weeks ago, I drove out to the Ankeny property alone near sunset. Snow covered most of the ground. Bare trees stood against orange winter light while cold wind rolled softly across the empty acreage. I stayed there almost an hour, just standing quietly, thinking about Susan, thinking about Derek, thinking about how quickly love and disappointment can occupy the same memory. Before leaving, I looked out across the frozen field and caught myself smiling slightly. Not because everything healed, it hadn't. Not even close. But the land was still there. The truth was still there. And somehow, so was I. Life lesson, listen carefully. People often confuse kindness with weakness because they don't understand restraint. Quiet people notice more than the world gives them credit for, especially older people. We've lived long enough to recognize patterns pride makes invisible. And if someone you love ever betrays you, remember this. You are allowed to protect yourself without hating them. You are allowed to tell the truth without screaming, and you are allowed to survive heartbreak without becoming cruel, because greed always leaves fingerprints eventually. Always. If this story meant something to you, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever been in a situation like this? We read every single one. And as always, thank you for being a part of this.